Hi everyone, Rhonda Craig here again. Tonight I want you to just be able to see a little bit more of that giant visual that we have in the background that we've covered and in the Old Testament, and we are quickly, maybe not so quickly, coming to a conclusion of the New Testament history. So in keeping with trying to highlight everything and not get into doctrine and not get off into the weeds, I just want to give you a quick overview about the Apostle Paul. You know, when we were talking about Stephen in one of the other ones, I mentioned him. So tonight is number 48, lesson number 48. And we talked about that they laid, those who were stoning Stephen laid their coats, or he held the coats of the ones who were. So it makes you want to look, who is Saul, rather. So when you look at his life, Saul was born in Tarsus, and in the city of Tarsus, and that was in the province of, I believe it was Cilicia, maybe, the Roman province of Cilicia. And because he was born there, he was a Roman citizen. That comes into play later on in his life, because he was not just a Jew. He was a Roman citizen, and that was because he was born in it. Now, Tarsus is where Turkey is today. So you can kind of get an idea about where that's located. If you think about Israel is here, it's clear up around the Mediterranean Sea there, up above. At the age of 13, his mother and dad were devout Pharisee Jews. And at the age of 13, it says that they sent him to Jerusalem to sit under the tutelage of one of those leaders, one of those chief priests, I guess you'd call him, on the Sanhedrin Council. Now, you remember the Sanhedrin Council was that council that convicted Jesus, and they heard all the cases that against the Jewish people. And his name was, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, Gamaliel maybe? And he was the professor. He was quite the teacher. And in fact, we hear of him when Peter is called in. They called Peter in front of the Sanhedrin Council for preaching the Messiah, Jesus of Nazareth being the Messiah, and they called him in, and they were going to try him, and they sent him out, and Gamaliel stood up. That's how we know who he is. This is in the book of Acts. He stood up and addressed the council and said, we've had other people who have led these, and, we might be doing more harm than good here by just, because it makes martyr, if we make a martyr out of him, it might just make it worse. If he's of God, we can't stop it anyway, and if he isn't, it'll fizzle. So that's how it kept him from being stoned. But so they flogged Simon Peter, and he left there after being beaten, rejoicing that he suffered as did Jesus. And so now we're going to talk about Paul. He was at a young age, and he was under this strict Pharisee teaching. And after Peter was flogged, and I mean the people who believed that Jesus was the Messiah, they were Jews. They were being persecuted, and so the church was we call it the ecclesia, the called out, began to disperse. But Saul went to the chief priest and said, "Give me letters, and I'm going to go to Damascus, and I will." Well, it says that he was breathing fire, going from house to house, pulling out people who believed in Jesus and taking them to jail, to prison, men and women. So he asked for these letters to go to Damascus, and he was going to go to the synagogues there and take them back to Jerusalem, and so that they could stand trial for being blaspheming. And on his way to Damascus, now he was very devout, thinking that he was doing the will of God. And on his way to Damascus, in Acts, we read about Jesus confronting him and stops him on the road. And a great light, he didn't see Jesus, but he saw this great light, and he heard the voice. And the people that were with him were astounded. They didn't see it, or maybe they saw it but didn't hear it. I don't know, one or the other, doesn't matter. And he said, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And anyway, he is blinded, and they had to lead him on to Damascus. And he said, you go on into Damascus, and there I'm going to send someone to tell you what to do. And so there was a fellow, a Christian in Damascus named Ananias, and Ananias didn't want to go because he had heard about Paul or Saul, and he was afraid to go. But the Lord assured him that he needed to go, and so he did. And when he did, his sight was restored, and he was converted, I guess is the right word. He had and he was baptized, and he became a believer. And it says that I believe, I should have been more careful with this. I'm not sure just exactly where he went from there. But I don't think he went back to Jerusalem right away. But they were afraid of him because they didn't know he'd been converted. And but some of the other apostles did. They eventually embraced him. But I think he went to Arabia for 3 years. And I'm not sure who taught him. It's always bothered me because he was around in Jerusalem when Jesus had his preaching and was in his ministry. The Bible doesn't record that he ever attended any of those, or that he ever saw him, or that nothing is said about him in relationship to Jesus' life and ministry before he was crucified and ascended. So, and it doesn't say anything about him sitting under the tutelage of the other apostles those 3 years. But somehow or other he was taught. And he went on to, and I think it behooves me right now to just put this out here. There are those who have studied and think that Paul or Saul, let me just talk about that name first. You know, his name was Saul, but back then most people had dual names like Simon Peter. And in Acts the 13th chapter it says his name was Saul, known as Paul. So he was called Paul after that, which makes sense that he wouldn't want to be called Saul anymore. But there are those who have studied and think that Saul or Paul's writings, which appeared before the writings of the Gospels, the apostles had not yet written down what they saw and heard and lived through when Paul wrote his letters to the churches that he established. And that's what the definition of an apostle is. They go and start churches and mentor them. And that was the Great Commission that Jesus had given to the disciples. And whenever they replaced Judas, one of the requirements was that they had to have been there and witnessed his ministry and his death and his resurrection. But But Saul was what they call out of season. He didn't do that. They replaced that Judas with Matthias because he qualified for that, and that's where the lots fell. But Saul was not, because he had encountered Jesus Christ himself on the road to Damascus. Well, there are those who have written that they don't believe that Paul was enlightened or converted like Acts talks about. I happen to believe that he was. I don't believe that our God that we serve would have allowed someone, a heretic, to have written of the 27 books. I think he wrote 12 or 13 of those that are in there. Those who are against him say, well, you're not Christianity today is not really the teachings of Jesus, is more of Paul. And if ever I have a question, because sometimes I do, whenever I'm reading one of Paul's letters and I come across something that's very pointed, legalistic, I think, now let me see what Jesus said about this. One of those things is like women in the church. They talk, Paul's letter, that women should be quiet and not talk in church or in the assembly, I guess is the way I want to put it. And Jesus said there's no male or female. And so I go back to what the teachings of Jesus when I think, because all of us carry our baggage. And as steeped in Phariseeism as Paul was, I have a feeling that sometimes his judgmental criticism things may have come out, and the times that he lived in may have seemed like gospel. I don't know. I don't mean to be a heretic here. Anyway, but I'm not questioning his devotion and his conversion. I'm not questioning that, because if you look at his ministry, I'm going to just see if I can show you this map. I don't know if you can get a do you see those dark lines on that map? Those are the missionary journeys. He made 3 missionary journeys. And my goodness, look at, he devoted his life to spreading the gospel. And I'm just astounded when you think about where he started. Let me look at this. I think I had it upside down. He started clear over here, and look at this. The first one, he did this one. And the second one, he got a little bit further. And the third one, he even got a bit further. But then, when he was going to be tried, I don't know that you can tell, he said, I appeal to Caesar. So that meant he had to go all the way to Rome to be tried. And so that was clear over here into Italy from Jerusalem. That's 1,400 miles. No one in all of history has ever been the kind of evangelist or spreading the gospel like Paul the apostle was. And he did signs and wonders. And so I'm not questioning that at all. And he was martyred in Rome under Nero, and he lost his life. But he wrote, and I'm going to show you this. These are the letters. I don't know that you can see these. I hope I'm going to hold them up here. Let me see here. Along that top line, you'll see PJ1. That was his first missionary journey, Paul's journey number 1. And that is in Acts the 13th chapter through the 15th. And during that time is when Galatians was written, and the book of James. And then if you look the next one to PJ2, look down there. Let me see if I can get this where you can see it. Right here. This line. PJ2. That's when Thessalonians was written. 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. And number 3 journey. Where are we? Number 3. Number 3 right here. You can see that one. I had the wrong one. This is number 1, number 2, number 3. The 3rd journey he wrote Corinthians, the 1st and 2nd Corinthians, and Romans. And then on the 4th journey, which would have been when he went to Rome, I'm assuming, he wrote Ephesus, Acts 22 to 28. He wrote Ephesians, Colossians, Philemon, wrote that one, and Philippians. And then you see in number 5, he wrote 1st and 2nd Timothy. He wrote those letters to his like his son Timothy. Titus, 1st Peter and 2nd Peter were written then. And then that other one says later apostles, the LA. You have 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, Jude, and Hebrews. And then, of course, the last one over there, the conclusion of the history would be Revelation, and that was written by John. I don't know what I have left out. I'll have to look again and see what I've left out and to wrap that up. I'm not going to go into what each one of those books is about because that's for you to study. That's for you to see. They were written for encouragement to the people that had been taught, the Gentiles who had been taught. They hadn't had any teaching, and they didn't have any Jewish teaching. They had had nothing. So he wrote these letters to encourage them to know how to live and to respond and to be. And, of course, those are saved so that we can understand what things we need to do to live a happy life in agreement with our new covenant. But I have to just thank the Lord that we have the new covenant that's written on our hearts. And when we hear something that's not quite right, we have the red flags. The Holy Spirit gives us the red flags to say, whoa, that's not quite right. And I appreciate that. Okay, guys, I'm going to let you go. We'll wrap it up probably next time. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for caring. Hope you've gotten something out of all these. See you next time.